Ever since I was a child, my parents made it clear that my brother was their priority, but I never thought they would go as far as taking the money meant for my medical treatment and using it for him instead. When I confronted them, they dismissed my concerns as if my health was secondary. As if I was secondary. The betrayal stung deeper than any illness ever could. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how much I longed for their love, I would always be an afterthought. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I cut ties, walked away, and chose myself for the first time. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least it was mine alone to walk. At first, the silence was unbearable. I kept waiting for them to call, to apologize, to show even the slightest hint of regret. But days turned into weeks, and the only thing that filled the void was the realization that they never would. I had always been the shadow to my brother's light, the afterthought in a family where love was conditional and sacrifices were expected only from me. Without their support, I was forced to navigate life alone, juggling my health issues with the struggle of survival. But for the first time, I was free. I found a job, a small apartment, and slowly, a sense of self-worth that had never been nurtured under their roof. Friends became my family, kindness replaced obligation, and I learned that love wasn't something to be begged for. It was something to be given freely or not at all. Yet, despite my newfound strength, the scars of abandonment lingered. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering if they missed me, if they ever thought about the child they let go so easily. But deep down I knew the truth. Some people never change, and waiting for them to do so only keeps you shackled to the past. So I let go, not with bitterness, but with the quiet understanding that walking away had been the most painful, yet necessary, act of self-preservation I had ever made. Time passed, and with it, the ache of their absence dulled into something manageable, something I could carry without it crushing me. I poured my energy into rebuilding my life, focusing on my health, as best I could with the limited resources I had. The struggles were constant. Medical bills piled up, exhaustion weighed me down, and some nights, loneliness crept in like an unwelcome guest. But even in the darkest moments, I reminded myself that this was still better than being in a home where I was unseen, unheard, and unloved. At least now, every step I took was mine alone, untainted by the suffocating weight of their favoritism. As the years went by, I built a life for myself that no longer revolved around the people who had abandoned me. I found stability in my work, comfort in my friendships, and slowly, a sense of belonging that I had never felt under my parents' roof. There were setbacks, of course. Hospital visits that drained both my strength and my savings. Moments of doubt where I questioned if I had made the right choice. But I refused to let those struggles define me. I had spent too long being defined by what I lacked, by the love I never received. Now, I was determined to define myself by the love I found elsewhere, by the resilience I had forged in their absence. Then one day, I received an unexpected message. It was from my brother. A simple, hesitant hello. As if he wasn't sure whether I would even respond. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. A flood of emotions washing over me. Anger, curiosity, grief for the sibling bond we never truly had. Against my better judgment I replied. We exchanged small talk at first, circling around the real reason he had reached out. And then finally he admitted it. Our parents were struggling. Financially, emotionally. He didn't say it outright, but I could read between the lines. They needed me now. The irony was almost laughable. For a long time, I sat with his words, weighing them carefully. A part of me wanted to say no immediately, to protect myself from falling back into old patterns of being the expendable one. But another part of me, the part that still, despite everything, longed for closure, wondered if this was my chance to finally face them, not as the child desperate for their love, but as the person I had become without them. And so, after much deliberation, I agreed to meet. Not for them, but for myself. I needed to see them, to look them in the eyes and know, without a doubt, that I was no longer the broken child they had left behind. When the day of the meeting arrived, I expected to feel nervous, but instead, there was only a calm certainty within me. I walked into that room knowing that nothing they said could change the past, and nothing they did now could erase the years of neglect. And when I finally saw them, older, wearier, the weight of time and consequence etched onto their faces. I realized something I never had before. I didn't need their love anymore. I didn't need their apology. I had already given myself everything they had withheld from me, and with that knowledge, I smiled not with bitterness, but with the quiet peace of someone who had finally truly let go. Sitting across from my parents after all these years felt surreal. They looked smaller than I remembered, not just physically but in the way they carried themselves, worn down by time, burdened by something unspoken. My mother, once so composed, had lines on her face that hadn't been there before. My father, who had always seemed larger than life in my childhood, now sat with slumped shoulders avoiding my gaze. It was strange to see them like this, to witness their vulnerability, after a lifetime of feeling like I was the only one who had to endure pain. For a long moment none of us spoke. My brother, who had insisted on arranging this meeting, shifted awkwardly in his seat, his eyes flickering between us as if trying to gauge the atmosphere. Finally, my mother exhaled a trembling breath and said my name, just my name, as if saying it was an act of courage in itself. "We've missed you," she added after a pause, her voice uncertain, unfamiliar. I didn't respond right away, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. If they had missed me, why had they never reached out? Why had it taken my brother's intervention for this meeting to happen? I had spent so many nights wondering if they even thought about me, if they regretted what they had done. Now that I was sitting in front of them, I realized that no apology, if one was even coming, would ever undo the years of pain I had endured alone. Still, I had come here for closure, and closure wasn't about getting what I wanted from them. It was about finding peace within myself. So, I asked the question that had haunted me for years. Why? My voice was steady, though my hands were clenched under the table. Why did you do it? Why was my health, my future, worth less than his? I nodded toward my brother, who flinched at my words, though he said nothing. My father sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the question was too much for him. "It wasn't like that," he muttered, but I only raised an eyebrow. Because it was exactly like that. My mother, on the other hand, looked like she was holding back tears. "We didn't think. We thought he had a better chance," she finally admitted, her voice breaking. "We thought if we gave him everything he'd succeed, and then he could help the whole family, including you." I stared at her, trying to process her words. It was a twisted sort of logic, one that placed bets on potential rather than valuing each child equally. It wasn't love, it was an investment strategy, and I had been the loss they had been willing to take. A bitter chuckle escaped me before I could stop it. "So you sacrificed me for a gamble?" I shook my head. "And did it work? Did it make your lives better?" Silence. My brother looked away, shame coloring his face. And I knew, without them saying it, that whatever they had hoped for, it hadn't come true. Maybe he hadn't turned out to be the success they had banked on. Maybe life had punished them in ways they hadn't foreseen. A part of me wanted to rub it in, to tell them that their plan had backfired, and that they deserved every ounce of regret they felt now. But another part of me, the part that had grown past needing their validation, felt nothing but exhaustion. I wasn't here for vengeance. I wasn't here to make them suffer. I was here to prove to myself that I was no longer the child who had once begged for their love. "I didn't come here for an apology," I finally said, standing up. "I came here to tell you that I'm done carrying this pain. I don't forgive you, not because I want to hold on to resentment, but because I don't owe you forgiveness. You made your choices. I had to live with them. And I built a life without you." My mother made a small wounded sound, but I didn't let it sway me. My father remained quiet, his expression unreadable. My brother still wouldn't meet my eyes. Maybe he felt guilty, maybe he didn't, but in the end it didn't matter. I had made my peace. I turned to leave, feeling lighter than I had in years. And as I walked out of that cafe, stepping into the sunlight, I realized something important. I had spent so much of my life waiting for them to change, to see me, to make things right. But I didn't need them anymore. I had already given myself everything they had failed to. And for the first time in my life I was truly, undeniably free. As I stepped out of the cafe, a strange sense of weightlessness settled over me. as if I had been carrying something heavy for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. The sun was warm on my skin, the air crisp with the scent of the city, and for the first time in years, I took a breath that wasn't laced with resentment or longing. I had done what I came to do. I had faced them, spoken my truth, and walked away, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in peace. But peace, I soon realized, was not the same as closure. Because even as I left them behind, my mind kept replaying the look in my mother's eyes, the silence of my father, the guilt written all over my brother's face. I told myself I didn't care, that their feelings were no longer my burden to carry. And yet, late at night, when the city quieted and my apartment was filled with nothing but the soft hum of the refrigerator, I would catch myself wondering, were they thinking of me now? Had I hurt them? Did they regret it? I forced myself not to dwell. I threw myself into work, into friendships, into moments of joy that I no longer felt guilty for experiencing. And slowly my life became mine again. My body, once neglected in the name of sacrifice, became something I nurtured. I found doctors who listened, friends who showed up, and a quiet kind of happiness in the life I had built from the ashes of their neglect. Then one evening my phone buzzed with a message from my brother. "Mom's in the hospital. It's bad." My first instinct was to ignore it, to remind myself that they had not been there for me when I had needed them most, that I owed them nothing now. But something in me hesitated. Not out of love, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to see, to witness, to understand, to confirm that I had truly outgrown the hold they had once had over me. So I went. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and cheap coffee, the kind that never quite masked the underlying scent of sickness. My brother was already there, sitting in the waiting room with his head in his hands. When he looked up and saw me, relief and surprise flickered across his face. "I didn't think you'd come," he admitted. I shrugged, unable to explain my own reasoning. Maybe I just needed to see for myself that this chapter of my life was truly closed. Or maybe despite everything, a part of me still needed to say goodbye. The hospital was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that carried weight, like it was holding its breath. My brother stood and led me down the hallway, his steps slow, hesitant, as if he was unsure whether I would change my mind at any moment. I almost did. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't my place, that whatever was happening in that hospital room belonged to them. Not to me. But something deeper, something older, pulled me forward. When we reached the door, my brother hesitated before pushing it open. The sight that met me was startling. My mother, once a figure of cold authority, always composed, always in control, looked small, fragile, barely a shadow of the woman I had known. Tubes ran from her arm, a heart monitor beeped softly beside her, and her breathing was slow, labored. My father sat beside the bed, his face unreadable, his fingers gripping the edge of the chair like he was holding on to something that was already slipping away. For a moment I stood there, unsure of what to feel. There was no rush of grief, no overwhelming sorrow, just a quiet realization that time had done what I had never been able to. It had changed them, weakened them, brought them to a place where they could no longer pretend to be invincible. My father looked up then, his tired eyes meeting mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in them that I had never seen before. Not disappointment, not anger, not indifference, just regret. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and for once I didn't feel small under his gaze. My brother shifted beside me, clearing his throat. "She asked for you," he said quietly, "before she got worse." I blinked at him. Why? The word hovered on my tongue, but I didn't say it. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe she had her reasons, or maybe, faced with her own mortality, she had realized too late that she had a daughter she had abandoned. Either way, I wasn't here for her. I was here for myself. Slowly I stepped forward, stopping at the edge of the bed. Her skin looked pale, almost translucent, her once sharp eyes fluttering open with effort. And when they landed on me, they softened in a way I had never seen before. "You came," she rasped, her voice weak. I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to say to a woman who had cast me aside like I was nothing? Who had taken everything meant for me and handed it to someone else? Who had only called for me when she had no other choice? "I'm here," I said finally. Not an offering of forgiveness. Not a promise of reconciliation. Just a fact. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say more, But no words came. And maybe that was for the best. There was nothing she could say now that would undo the past. Nothing that would make it right. So I stood there, watching the woman who had once held so much power over me fade into something small, something mortal. And in that moment I realized the truth. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't love her either. She was simply a person who had failed me, and now at the end of it all she had to live with that. A nurse entered the room, checking the monitors, adjusting the drip. My mother's eyes fluttered closed again, exhaustion pulling her back into unconsciousness. My father looked back down at his hands, as if unwilling to meet my gaze again. My brother shifted awkwardly beside me, unsure of what to do. And me? I took a slow breath, the kind that filled my lungs completely, and I stepped back. I had seen what I needed to see. I had stood in front of the people who had once broken me and realized that they no longer had that power. I turned to leave, my footsteps quiet against the sterile hospital floor. My brother called my name, but I didn't stop. There was nothing left to say. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the weight that I had carried for so long finally lifted. I had come seeking closure, and now I had it. Not in the form of apologies or reconciliation, but in the realization that I no longer needed either. I was free. Finally, truly free. And that was enough. The night air felt different, lighter, clearer. As if the universe had exhaled alongside me. I stood outside the hospital for a long time, staring at the city lights flickering in the distance, letting the realization settle deep into my bones. I had walked in carrying a lifetime of pain, resentment, and unanswered questions. But I had walked out carrying nothing but myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. I took the long way home, wandering the city streets, breathing in the life around me. The hum of traffic, the distant laughter of strangers, the warmth of lights glowing from apartment windows. This world, this life had always been here, waiting for me to claim it, waiting for me to stop looking back. The days that followed were strangely quiet. My brother sent me a few messages. Updates on our mother's condition. Questions left unanswered when I didn't reply. I could feel the weight of his guilt pressing through the screen, but I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't angry at him, not anymore, but I also wasn't ready to pretend we could be something we had never been. He had benefited from the choices our parents made, but he had also been a child just like me. And maybe he was trying now in the only way he knew how. Weeks passed, then months. Life settled into its own rhythm. I worked, I laughed, I built something real and solid piece by piece. My health still had its struggles, but now I faced them with the quiet kind of strength, knowing that I was the one carrying myself forward. Then one morning, another message from my brother. She's gone. I stared at the screen, waiting for something, grief, anger, relief to hit me. But there was nothing. Just a strange, quiet understanding that the last thread tying me to that past had finally snapped. I didn't go to the funeral. I thought about it. I imagined standing at the gravesite, watching people mourn a woman they had known in ways I never had. But in the end I chose myself. Instead I went to the ocean. Standing at the water's edge, watching the waves pull in and out, I let go. Of the things she never said. Of the things I never got to hear. Of the love that had never been mine to hold. And then I turned away, walking forward, toward a life that had always belonged to me. The waves crashed against the shore, their rhythm steady, unbroken. As if the ocean had always known the art of letting go. I stood there for a long time, watching the horizon stretch endlessly before me, feeling the wind tangle through my hair like invisible fingers trying to pull me toward something new. And for the first time I let them. I didn't cry. There was nothing to mourn, at least not in the way most people might expect. My mother had been gone from my life long before she had taken her final breath. I had spent years grieving what could have been, what should have been. Now there was only the quiet understanding that the past could no longer touch me. That night I sat on my small apartment's balcony, looking out over the city. My phone buzzed, a message from my brother. "Are you okay?" I stared at the words for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was I okay? I didn't know how to answer that. There was no single word for what I felt: relief, closure. A strange sort of emptiness that wasn't sadness, just space where something used to be. Instead of typing a response, I set the phone down. Some things didn't need to be explained. Days turned into weeks. Life moved forward, and so did I. My brother reached out again, more frequently this time. Small messages, small attempts, as if trying to find a way back into something we had never truly had. And slowly, cautiously, I let him. Not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to see if something new could be built from the ruins of the past. We met for coffee one afternoon, neutral ground, no ghosts hanging between us. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe just more tired. For the first time, I saw him as a person outside of the role he had played in my pain. And maybe that was the real gift of letting go, not just freeing myself from the weight of the past, but freeing him from it too. I don't expect us to be close, he admitted, stirring his coffee absently. But I'd like to try. If you're willing. I thought about it, about everything we had been through, everything we hadn't. And then I nodded. Okay. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness. It was simply a door cracked open, letting in the possibility of something new. And for the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward. The days that followed felt lighter somehow, as if by cracking open that door, even just a little, I had made space for something I never thought possible. Not redemption. Not a perfect, healed family. Just possibility. And maybe that was enough. My brother and I didn't suddenly become inseparable, but we kept talking. Sometimes it was short messages. Hope you're doing okay, or saw something today that reminded me of you. Other times we met for coffee and sat in the quiet comfort of two people learning how to exist in each other's lives without the weight of the past crushing them. It wasn't easy. Sometimes I wanted to walk away. Sometimes I wondered if we were just fooling ourselves, trying to stitch together something too broken to be mended. But then there were moments, small, unexpected moments, that made me think maybe it was worth it. Like the time we sat in a park and he admitted, in a hesitant, almost embarrassed voice, that he had always looked up to me but had been too scared to show it. Or the time he apologized, not in some grand rehearsed speech, but in a quiet, genuine way that I knew came from a place of truth. I should have spoken up, he said one evening, staring down at his hands. I should have done more. I had spent years resenting him for benefiting from what I had been denied. But sitting there watching him wrestle with his own regrets, I realized something. He had been a child too. He hadn't chosen our parents' favoritism. He had just been the one they picked. And maybe that had been its own kind of burden. I'm not angry anymore, I admitted, surprising even myself. I don't know if I can ever forget, but I don't want to live in that place anymore. He nodded as if he understood. And maybe in his own way he did. The seasons changed. Life continued. My health still had its ups and downs, but I was no longer carrying it alone. I had friends who showed up, doctors who listened, and a version of myself who refused to be defined by the love I hadn't received. Then, one day, my brother did something I never expected. He handed me a small envelope, hesitant, almost nervous. I know I can't fix the past, he said, but I want to do something. For you. Inside was a check. More money than I had ever seen in one place. Enough to cover my medical expenses for the foreseeable future. I stared at it, emotions warring inside me. Guilt, gratitude, anger, relief. I don't want charity, I said quietly. It's not charity, he replied. It's what should have been yours in the first place. I didn't cry. Not then. But later, alone in my apartment, I let myself feel everything. The loss, the exhaustion, the strange, unexpected warmth of knowing that someone, even after all this time, wanted to make things right. I deposited the check. Not because it erased the past, but because for the first time, I was allowing myself to accept something without feeling like I had to apologize for needing it. And maybe, just maybe, that was what healing really looked like. Not forgetting. Not pretending the past hadn't hurt. But allowing yourself to move forward anyway. Life didn't change overnight, but something inside me had shifted. I carried myself differently, felt lighter. As if a knot I hadn't realized I'd been holding in my chest had finally loosened. Accepting the money wasn't just about covering medical bills. It was about acknowledging that I deserved care. That my needs had always been valid, even if my parents had failed to see it. My brother and I still weren't close in the way siblings in happy families might be. There were still unspoken things between us. Gaps in our memories of each other. Years of separation that couldn't be undone. But there was effort now from both of us. And sometimes effort was enough. One evening, he invited me to his apartment for dinner. It was the first time I had seen his home. Not just the cafe or a neutral meeting place, but the space he had built for himself. It was strange stepping into his world, seeing parts of his life that I had never been a part of. A bookshelf filled with mystery novels, a framed photo of us as children sitting awkwardly on a shelf, as if he had only recently decided it belonged there. "I didn't even know you liked to read," I said, running my fingers over the spines of his books. "There's a lot we don't know about each other," he admitted. "But maybe we can change that." I didn't reply right away, but as we sat down to eat, just the two of us, no ghosts of our parents looming between us, I realized something. He was right. The past had taken enough from us. The future, at least, was still ours to shape. Months passed. I focused on my health, my work, my friendships. My brother and I saw each other more often, sometimes sharing a quiet meal, sometimes just sending a text to check in. It wasn't perfect, but it was something real. And for the first time, I let myself believe that I wasn't as alone as I had once thought. Then one day I got a letter. It was from my father. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar, shakier than I remembered. For a long time, I just stared at it, debating whether I even wanted to know what was inside. What could he possibly say that would change anything? But in the end, curiosity won. Or maybe it was something else. The letter was short. No grand apology, no dramatic plea for forgiveness. Just a handful of words that sat heavy in my chest long after I read them. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know. I regret it. All of it. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." That was it. No excuses. No justifications. Just regret, laid bare in black ink. I held the letter for a long time, feeling the weight of what it meant and what it didn't. Regret didn't erase the past. An apology didn't change the years of pain. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to know that he finally understood what he had done. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. Some doors, once closed, don't need to be reopened. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not to dwell on, not to revisit, but simply to acknowledge that it existed. That the past had happened, but it no longer controlled me. And with that I moved forward. Not as the child who had been left behind. Not as the person who had once begged for love that never came. But as myself, whole, unbroken, and finally truly free.